Greetings, everybody. My name is Stephen Butler. I'm in programming here at Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies. We want to welcome you to this very unique program we have for you. We want to welcome all the people, of course, who are joining us here in the Zoom room and all of those who are watching on Facebook via the live stream. So before we kind of get going here, I want to make sure that everybody knows who is watching on Facebook, but there will be a time for questions. So we invite you to put those in the comments section, or you can send them privately to the Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Buddhist Studies Facebook inbox. And there will be a chance for those to be asked to our illustrious presenters. So on to that. We are very, very privileged to host a very unique program for us. It's the first of this format, but we feel we have two very dynamic presenters to engage in this very delicious topic. Delicious was the word used prior to the broadcast by Venerable Robina, so I am intentionally using it here because I think any of us who have attempted to integrate karma into their lives would have to say that on good days it can be delicious, and on bad days it can feel slightly more challenging than that. But I think that's why we're all here. So I want to welcome Venerable Robina Courtin. Since the 70s, she has been a nun. Prior to that, if you know anything about her, she has been on the spiritual path in one way or another, searching for truth and meaning for a very long time. And since becoming a nun, she has served her lamas in a variety of capacities, founding the Liberation Prison Project, being an editor at Wisdom Publications, and basically crisscrossing the globe constantly, sharing her experience of the Dharma, her wisdom, and her teachings for all of us, and practitioners of all scopes. And that's a very unique thing, and that's why we're especially happy to have her here with us, is we know that this is a topic that all of us kind of deal with and deal with again and deal with again and deal with again. Joining Venerable Robina tonight is Scott Snibbe, somebody who is perhaps also not too unfamiliar for Tse Chen Ling audiences. Scott has been a longtime Dharma student and practitioner. He's been leading meditations in the Bay Area specifically and beyond for many, many years. And he's merged his I don't want to say non-Buddhist path, but his non-explicitly Buddhist path, his professional path of science and art and technology in a podcast that he launched earlier this year called The Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment, which is dealing with these juicy topics and presenting them grounded in authenticity, but presenting them to a secular audience. So a full disclosure, I have the privilege of producing that with Scott. So we're very glad to have both of them here. Earlier this year, the idea for this actually came from an episode on that podcast where the two of them spoke at length about difficult topics, and one of those being karma. So we're going to start off here by asking the question of the evening, and I'm going to direct it to the Venerable Sangha member of our two presenters. According to Buddhism, what is karma? What from the Buddhist point of view, what is karma?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. I love talking about karma. I know when I first heard the teachings when I was 31 or something from Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, I didn't understand a word they were saying. It seemed so, especially Lama Zopa, it seemed pretty kind of complex and arcane. And I remember hearing this word karma. And all I know is it resonated very powerfully for me. And that was the thing that sustained me, really. It was like I'd been missing all my life. So, okay, karma, it's Sanskrit. It simply means action, but what it's really referring to is the mental action, which is thought, intention. So basically, the essence of it is the Buddha's saying the universe consists of trillions of sentient beings, mind possessors, not just humans. We're about 0.0% of it, and then animals and lots of others we can't see. This is Buddha's observation. Countless beings, and this information about karma too came well before the Buddha. These amazing Indians, as the Dalai Lama said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago, actually, who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. And then Buddha didn't chuck out all that he'd learned. He moved on in his own direction, and and karma is utterly central to the Buddhist idea. In fact, if we don't factor in karma, Buddhism as a kind of coherent worldview would collapse into a heap of nonsense. So it's kind of essential, it's fundamental. So, okay, the word means action, but the Buddha is basically saying every millisecond of what any sentient being thinks or does or says necessarily, just naturally, leaves seeds in the mind, is an action starting with the thought that then is carried out often by its servants, which is the body and speech. And necessarily each of those thoughts, those actions, mental actions, and then verbal and physical, leave imprints or seeds in the mind. We program our mind. And those seeds, being seeds, will just naturally, unless you pull them out, will just naturally grow in the future as our own experiences. So as the Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation. I mean, that's the essence of it, you know. Then we unpack it as we go along. That's the essence of it. So for the Buddha, the crucial point here is it's the basis of Buddha's view about ethics. It's the first sort of entry-level junior school grade 1 into Buddhism is you abide by the laws of karma. But the crucial point is this, not because Buddha said so. He's not the creator. There's no view like that. It's his observation that everything that we think and do and say produces the future that the person we become. So he exhorts us to not kill and not steal and not lie, because those seeds will leave imprints in our mind that will ripen as suffering like that for us in the future. So it's like the basis of the beginning of a practice, the beginning of good ethics. I mean, that's the essence, and let's unpack it from there, you know.
That's wonderful, Venerable Robina. First of all, I want to say thanks for the opportunity being here with you. You know, for everyone listening, I'm a student of Venerable Robina and a fan. So it's really nice to be here together with you again.
Yes, it is, God.
So I want to follow up on that a little bit. I think the fact that karma's definition is action and not result is something like very interesting that, you know, you and a number of teachers, you know, emphasize again and again. And I wonder if it's worth clarifying that a little bit more, because I think a lot of people, when they think of karma, it's more like the lottery, you know, that things are happening to me. Like they kind of say, oh, it's karma, when they can't explain why something happened. But the Buddhist view is very much the opposite of that, right? And it's much more focused on action, the things that you do now and planting seeds, rather than trying to like guess whether you got a parking spot or not and what that came from, right?
You know, it's really true, isn't it, Scott? I mean, we have a very superstitious kind of view about it, you know.
Yeah.
This karma is this kind of an alternative to a creator, or an alternative to God, or an alternative to some kind of universe that's got some conspiracy theory, and we're somehow sort of dominated by it. But I mean, it's when we use the ordinary analogies like the Buddha does, you know, we understand perfectly well. I mean, we're brilliant at the whole concept of cause and effect. Yes, the word is action, but it brings a reaction. So another way of putting it is referring to this natural law of cause and effect. I mean, this is the better way to start to unpack it. It's the natural law. And I think this is a really major point to comprehend. When we think of ethics now, when we think of religious ethics, we immediately assume there's a boss, which is God. I'm not being critical, and that is the view. God is this, you know, a perfect being who decides, for whatever reason, to create me, to create the universe, and to create the laws. So I always quote this, you know, that my Jesuit priest friend, I asked him, by definition, what is a sin? And he said, by definition, a sin, Buddha would say a negative action, is doing what God said not to do. Now that fits perfectly, because if there is a creator, and Buddha completely disagrees with that, he's not being rude, but he says we don't need creating, we do fine creating our own mess, and luckily we can create our own happiness. But there's no view like that in Buddhism. That means there's no view of punishment and reward. And one of the ways we hear it so heavily is this dualistic view that there's somehow the karma is an equivalent of being punished. And we tend to think of it as punishment. We don't think of the reward part. You know, we always wonder why bad things happen. We never care why good things happen. So we impute that meaning onto this law of karma. And then we freak out. And the commonest thing is, so anyway, it's the Buddha's view is he's not a creator. He doesn't posit a creator. He's simply observed this. And this is something very powerful. We can't imagine observing this, because who can observe past lives? Well, Buddha's view of the mind is very simple. It says, of course, the mind is more subtle, and we can learn to access these subtler levels, and eventually we can have the capacity, which is what Buddha's done, and to see the past and the future. So it's something we can prove eventually. But the essence of it is, in the same way we really understand in the natural world, we understand exactly there are laws called botany, there are laws called art. No, there are laws called, math. There are laws called gravity. And we accept that they're laws that clever people have observed, not created, but observed and articulated and codified. And then we know that you use those laws to get what you want. So when you know there's a law called botany, you don't sit there going, oh, I wonder what botany is doing. Oh my God, look at this, is all to do with botany. And you sit there passively seeing these results. You know perfectly well what you do with botany is you learn the law so you can get exactly what you want. That's the view that Buddha has. That given that we're driven by this natural law, the law of karma, all beings run within this natural law. Such that everything we think and do and say produces our future experiences. So he says, if you want to be happy, then you create the causes. If you want flowers in your garden, you better know what to plant. If you don't want weeds, you better know what to pull out, and you better know what not to plant. So it's really, that's a perfect analogy, and they use this all the time. So it's this law that a Buddhist, if they're using it intelligently, well, you would want to learn the details, not just say, you don't say, oh, why is there a garden? Oh, it's botany. You learn the details. And the same here, we tend to say, oh, it's karma, but you learn the details, and then you can learn to govern and to learn to know, you can learn to produce the person you want to become. It's very powerful. It's very empowering, actually, because it's not punishment and it's not reward. It's a natural law, not made up by anybody, That's really, but this is the hardest part, I think, because we have this natural dualistic idea of ethics being punishment and reward. Someone's out to get us. It's nothing to do with that in Buddhism. No view like that at all.
Yeah, that's very nice. And the nice thing about your examples of gravity and math and botany is that all of these things are immaterial, right? That even if you believe it, even if you're a completely secular person,
yes,
you believe in math, you believe in gravity,
that's right,
and you believe in botany, right?
Yes.
Like, so because people often freak out and start to say, oh, this is karma is an immaterial thing. But you could say gravity, math, botany are immaterial, even love. Love is something that's immaterial, and yet we believe in it. So talking about karma as if it's another type of rule system that governs the universe, I think is very, very productive, the way that you say that. I think I'd love to go a little bit in the secular view, because I've learned so much from you as you taught on these topics, because you span all the way from very secular view, very practical view, to the very deep, most traditionally Buddhist view. So one thing I heard you once say, people asking you about cause and effect, you started explaining, people saying, well, how do I achieve something in life? How do I create the causes for, for example, getting a PhD? And you said, well, that doesn't just happen in an instant, right? You have the idea in your mind, and then you make the plan and so on. Can you talk a little bit how karma fits into a more, the kind of secular view of how you accomplish things in life, and how you create a happy mind, how you create the causes for a happy mind?
Well, that's creating the cause for a happy mind is the point, really, is Buddha's whole deal. So, let's look at the word happy, for example. One way of describing all of Buddhism is in terms of its being a path to stop suffering and get happiness. That really is one way of putting it. And so that's where the whole Buddhist ethics idea, the law of karma, fit in absolutely perfectly. So in general, the first principle of karma is that whatever we think and do and say is an action, karma, starting with the mental action that then programs the mind. I think Buddha would have liked that term, programs our mind, and then, or leaves seeds in it, and then that eventually produces what you become. But before we go even further, if we look at this, we understand this logically, but we just don't talk like this. If you become a musician, or whatever we want to call it, you're programming your mind first with the theories. You've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama Yeshe says, and learn musical theories. And then eventually, you've got to be really accurate. Can't just make up what you think Bach is saying. You've got to learn the theory so precisely, and that's in your mind. Your mind has to be programmed, and then your fingers can eventually put that music in the piano, and then you play the piano. Well, that's all Buddha's saying, is the person we become is produced by us, and it starts with the mind. But this is something initially is quite shocking, I think, because I remember Lama Zopa said The vast majority, all humans on this planet, have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind, meaning their thoughts and feelings and emotions, play any role at all in their lives. And why, and this is one of the obstacles to our thinking about karma, is because we are believing very strongly, and this is reinforced with our neuroscientific views, with our psychological views in the modern world, and with ego's view, actually, that the outside world is what produces me. I'm this innocent victim who didn't ask to get born. I got plonked on this earth, kind of this shape, this package, given a personality, given conditions that I have no say over. And then what goes on in my world, my mother, my father, my boyfriend, the weather, the events, they are what produce me. And that's why we spend all our energy focusing on those. And then we know we want to be happy and we know we don't want to suffer. But what we believe absolutely, utterly in the bones of our being without being taught is that happiness comes from the outside. When I get the nice boyfriend, the nice cake, suffering comes from the ugly boyfriend and the bad cake. So we spend all our energy manipulating the outside world. And that's our philosophy. So Buddha's not arguing with that. He's not being fundamentalist. He just says you're missing the main player, baby, which is your mind. And that's what Buddha's expertise is. That's why meditation, this brilliant skill, these Indians before the Buddha invented this brilliant psychological skill that's called single-pointed concentration, that the world vaguely knows as mindfulness, is this marvelous psychological skill, this brilliant technique that enables us to focus and harness this mind of ours so we can do the job of beginning to see what's going on in here and realizing that that is the main player in our happiness and suffering. This is not initially evident to us. And even if good Buddhists for 40 years, we still don't even quite have confidence in this. So it's the job of learning to know our mind intimately. And then the next level of detail about happiness and suffering. If every minute of what we think and do and say produces who we become, and that's the best way to put it, if every minute of whatever you do on the piano produces the musician you become, if everything you do with your mind produces the person you become, and that's exactly what Buddha is saying, then we've got to know the details. And the details are simple. What happiness is. Happiness is, if you'll say, well, how are you, Robina? I'm happy. Tell me about your happiness. And I'll proceed to tell you all the nice things that happened to me, my nice cake, my nice boyfriend. Equally with suffering, because we're convinced it's the outside. But for the Buddha, happiness is referring to a mental state. And suffering is also referring to a mental state. It includes the body as well. So the causes of happiness, Buddha says, are my actions, mental and physical and verbal actions of virtue, of doing actions of body, speech, and mind, that the grossest level, that benefit others. And that is an action that is motivated by love, kindness, generosity, wisdom, intelligence, compassion. And a negative action is one that's driven by anger, attachment, jealousy, depression, whatever. And Buddha makes this clear distinction between the neurotic states of mind and the virtuous ones, which is not how we think in modern psychology. So understanding the fundamentals about the Buddhist model of the mind, what is a negative state, what is a positive one, actions driven by the negative ones, and there's logic to this, it's not moralistic when we understand it, that those actions are based, they're utterly self-centered, they're coming from fear, they're neurotic, they're distorted, and they'll put imprints in my mind that will ripen in the future, and we'll go into the details when we're ready, as various experiences of suffering. And that every moment of my actions that are positive, which is an action that benefits another and is driven by love or compassion, that programs my mind with that virtue and will necessarily ripen my happiness. So it's a very integrated kind of view, but it's not punishment and it's not reward, which is how we think of it. And it's got nothing to do with somebody else seeing you do it. It's your own internal process, That's the essence of the view of karma. So logically, Buddha says, guess what? I want happiness. I don't want suffering. Well, he says, you better create the causes, baby, because you're the boss. That's the essence of it. So that means we have to know what the mind is. We've got to know what Buddha means by the mind. We've got to know what he means by virtuous states of mind. We've got to know what he means by positive, negative states of mind. And then that produces the person we become. So forget future life and past life. Let's look at it in ordinary view of what you just said, secular terms. It's a no-brainer. Look at people we know who are kind, who are generous, who are loving. I mean, look at them. They're called happy people. Anybody who's got a more joyful mind, they might be poor. Their husband might have died. They might be in prison. I mean, I can prove this by knowing amazing human beings in prison who've discovered that the outside world is not the cause of their suffering and that they can change their minds. This is the essence of the whole point. And we can prove this ourselves. You don't have to worry about future life, past life, This is evident to anybody who does the analysis. And it takes courage to do it,
Mm. You were talking a little bit there about what genuine happiness is, which isn't getting all the things that you want. It's not about getting, the cake and the parking spot and the partner and so on.
That's right.
And I've heard this, I think we've all of us who are into Buddhism a little bit have heard this, that a Buddhist mind training approach doesn't guarantee that bad things won't happen to you.
That's
But
right.
what it does help you with is to actually maintain happy, throughout whatever happens to you.
That's right.
And you were talking about this, that happiness is not external, it's about how you respond to things.
That's right.
So could you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's really interesting to the audience, because we tend, again, like conventionally, I think a lot of us tend to think of karma as like getting the stuff we want from outside. But what is it really we're trying to do with our minds by creating positive imprints through positive action? What is the result we're looking for from the process of creating positive?
I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, in the long term, or just simply day to day?
I think day to day to start with.
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think this is something we can prove. You don't need to think about. I mean, you don't even need to know whether your mind is in your toenail or your brain or somewhere else to know that this is true. And this is why I like to quote some of my friends in prison. There's one woman in particular I always quote, who was she's not Buddhist. She did yoga and things, but she didn't have any kind of religious view. She was brought up as a Jew, but she had no religious practice.
Mm-hmm.
But you could see from the way she responded to her outrageous situation in prison, where she and her husband this is in the 70s in Florida. They were hitching in Florida, and two guys picked them up, something like this. And then the police stopped the drivers, and the two guys killed the police and blamed the hippies, these two hippies, with their kids. So basically they're on death row in Florida. The husband even got executed after several years. It's like beyond a nightmare environment. I mean, I've got many friends in prison, and I hear about people who've been wrongly accused. It's so common. And they literally lose their minds, go out of their brains with despair and rage, and I mean, we go mad, and we know this ourselves. Ordinary life, you don't need to be on death row illegally to know that when we don't get what attachment, this is the essence of it in Buddhism. When we don't get what attachment wants, that's what we mean by suffering. So she somehow had this remarkable ability, this incredibly powerful mind, that she was in isolation for many years with just a Bible or something. She said she knew she had the choice to change the way she interpreted her situation. She didn't call Buddhism. She never used the word karma. But this is, for me, the exact proof. And every one of us knows this is true. But it is the hardest practice on the planet, because the instinct of ego is to want to blame, is to want to feel despair. I mean, look in the smallest thing that goes wrong, when someone is mean to you, when your boyfriend's unkind. We can't stop thinking about it. And we are so convinced that's the pain. So to have this powerful, courageous mind, she was there for 17 years. She eventually got out. And now when I meet her, I know many people who've been in prison, and especially when there's been such a difficult situation, they're kind of emotionally broken. When you meet this woman, she's like a little old lady. You'd never know she had these 17 years of hell, because she was able to change her mind. So she's got no baggage that she's carrying. And I'm not trying to be negative about our Western viewpoints about psychology, but what's that term we use?
Like projection? Or?
No, when you've, from the past, all the suffering you haven't dealt with, and it comes up, there's letters, it's got, what's it called?
Oh, PTSD, you mean?
Yes, that one. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
She does not have post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is the point that Buddha's making. She's not a Buddhist, but she completely is doing what Buddha said, which means Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He's not a boss, but it's intelligence. She has not carried baggage. And that means she wasn't resisting it. She wasn't resenting it. She wasn't getting angry with it as it's happening. That's why we go mad. That's why we suffer. I remember hearing at the same time as I knew about this woman first. I know her now personally. She's out of prison. I heard about this fellow who was also wrongly accused of murder, who literally did lose his mind. And what does that mean in Buddhist terms? This is the thing. We haven't looked into the Buddhist view much here, but the Buddha's got this clear analysis of the neurotic states of mind that are why we suffer so badly, the voices of ego. So there's attachment, which is this junkie in us that only wants the nice things. It's so normal, but when it doesn't get the nice things, when it doesn't get what I want, we literally lose our mind. So this guy was out of his brain, raging daily. I did not rape and kill that woman. I did not rape and kill that woman. He didn't, but nor did she do what she was accused of. But she had this extraordinary, you could have to call it emotional intelligence. She didn't learn it. She was there. She was born with it. She had a patient mind. She wasn't angry, and she knew she had the choice to change her mind. And that's why she was a happy person. This is the simple point. This is the essence of the entire Buddha's view. So he happens to be saying that we've got this ability for such happiness, we wouldn't even believe it, you know. I mean, we recently did a course on using Lama Yeshe's book on Mahamudra, this amazing meditation technique. And Lama talks about some of the qualities that every human has the potential to accomplish of incredible joy from working on the mind, you know. That's what Buddha's expertise is. And we're only now in our modern culture learning this. We're hearing it, but we just can't equate it. It's so astonishing what Buddha's saying. And when we work on our mind, that's when we can have happiness, and the levels to which we can't even imagine, you know. So it's not illogical. We know it. We kind of practice it every day, but we don't join the dots, you know. We just do it sometimes by accident. So it's powerful what Buddha is saying. It's amazing what he's saying, you know.
Yeah.
It's
So
like practice.
So you touched on responsibility. I think was one part of it, is taking responsibility for your own mind and steering it in a direction that will create happiness.
That's exactly right, Scott.
Versus blame, right?
Yes.
The other thing you just mentioned was your potential too. Like, I think what you call in Buddhism, Buddha nature, but maybe elaborating a little bit on that, you know, karma suggests a directionality, you know, that there's a
absolutely
towards
a total directionality. So okay, it's really, this is a big picture, the long term, you know, but it's just tasty kind of psychologically. The word Buddha in Sanskrit, the etymology is very delicious. Bud, and the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye, Buddha. Bud or Sang implies the utter eradication from our being, from our mind, from our consciousness. These words are used synonymously. Of all the neuroses, of all delusions, of all fear, of all the dramas, all attachment and anger and jealousy. And this is a very shocking concept initially in modern psychology. There's no equivalent in our view. So that sounds like mental illness to us. It's not impossibility, which is why we think it's religion. But that's Buddha's finding. It's a psychological state. And there's and then the other one, Da, implies not only can we rid the mind of all the rubbish, which means we can rid the mind of all the suffering, because they're the cause of the suffering. We can also develop to perfection, love, compassion, intelligence. So Buddha's point, and this is coming from his own direct experience, and anybody who's practiced Buddhist methodology since the time of the Buddha, and this is the point, this has to not just be believed, but proved from our own experience, that delusions, neuroses, and they're so specifically dealt with in Buddhist psychology, that they're not at the core of our being. They're adventitious. They're not integral to who we are. This is fundamental to the whole point that Buddha's making. And that the virtues, the goodness, the intelligence, the love, the compassion, and as well as joy and contentment, they are integral to who we are. They are who we really are. They are at the core of our being. Now, this is not the neuroscientific view. This is not the psychological view of the modern world. So it takes a bit of thinking to analyze this. It's not a belief. We have to learn to identify that. And then we can have some confidence in that. Forget whether you want to become a Buddha, but just some confidence that we're not set in stone. And that's what's so amazing about neuroplasticity these days. I mean, a Canadian scientist said it's the greatest finding of the 20th century. That we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. I mean, you know, these experiments they're doing on the minds of even just meditators, that even just by thinking about compassion, you reconfigure your brain. So this should be enormously encouraging to us, that because ego feels, this is who I am. Anger is who I am. I am depressed. I am no good. I am jealous. We grossly overestimate the role of those states of mind in our lives. We all do. I mean, I've never met a person who says, oh, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. Nobody says that. We are addicted to the negative ones, but they loom large in our mind. And so we assume this is who I am. This is why we despair. So even having some confidence, which that woman in prison had, and she had enormous power to change her own mind on her own. She was extraordinary. So she was able to manage this nightmarish situation. And interestingly, one more point about her. When you go mad, when you go crazy with anger and despair, you can do nothing to help yourself. But she, as long as she kept a positive, happy mind, she continuing to work on her freedom, and she eventually got her freedom. The other guy probably never got his freedom because he couldn't think about it. So a happy mind is also a clear mind, a wise mind, an intelligent mind that can see the whole story, you know. But this marvelous potential, and the fundamental point of it is in Buddhist psychology, that the positive states of mind have this characteristic of being reasonable, of being valid. And then the negative ones are like these ridiculous, off-the-wall, distorted, just exaggerating misconceptions. And then they're the tragedy, they're the ones we buy into. They're the ones that drag us down to hell, you know. So knowing, I mean, that's why Buddha's view of the mind you don't worry about karma to understand Buddha's view of the mind. It's absolutely brilliant. And more these days, people are doing that. You get so much courage when you realize that by changing your mind, you can become this marvelous person. And then, of course, you can help others. The two wings of the bird, wisdom wing and compassion wing. Dalai Lama says, you know, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's what we're discussing right here, the work we can do on our own minds. And what we mean by mind is not getting, you know, brains changed. It's by changing our conceptual stories, changing our thoughts, changing our feelings, changing our emotions. That's the job. That's the job. And anybody could do that. A communist could do that, you know.
Yeah, I recently talked to Dr. Rick Hansen, and he was very much affirming this view, you know, even from a neuroscientific perspective.
Okay, yeah.
He said that neuroscientifically, they've proven whatever you think, every single thought you have in your brain just creates, it's like digging a groove. Every time it just digs deeper and deeper.
That's exactly all Buddha's saying, is that you program your mind in a certain direction. And I mean, we know, forget whether it's, you see, that's the thing about, forget whether it's the brain or not, forget the brain. We know if you sit there and practice piano every day, you're not surprised you become good at it. So it's proving the point. And if we can prove it by seeing that the brain changes, and that helps us kind of get some confidence in it. But we know it already. We know we can turn ourselves into a brilliant musician or mathematician. We just don't know that we can turn ourselves into a happy person or a suffering person, because we have a very different philosophical explanation of it. That's the part that's kind of interesting. So we do understand karma in a way. We understand it by doing the things we do every day. Learning gardening, learning music. We know we produce the person we become, but we don't know that we can produce the happy person and the suffering person, because we don't have that philosophical view. And that's the essence of what Buddha can offer us, you know.
Yeah, very nice. You mentioned delusions, and I think that's worth unpacking a little bit, because these two words are often mentioned together in Buddhism, karma and delusions.
Okay, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how delusions relate to karma, and, you know, which one we need to watch out for?
Okay. Well, basically, okay. I mean, there's the different levels of practice, as I suggested before. We've got the wisdom wing and the compassion wing, which is a lovely way of packaging, as a way of presenting the levels of Buddhist practice. So the more advanced one, the bodhisattva path, is the compassion wing. But the nuts and bolts of Buddha's teachings on karma and the mind, and they're the essence of it, which are taught in the Four Noble Truths, Buddha's first teaching. These are the fundamentals, like the nuts and bolts of Buddha's view of the universe, Buddha's philosophy and Buddhist psychology. So this is delusion, then, is a word, and in English it's a really excellent word. In some other languages it's kind of weird, but in English it's brilliant. We know if you're accused of being delusional, we know that you're living in la la land, you're not in touch with reality. And this is absolutely bullseye for Buddha's view about the way the neurotic states of mind work. So basically the Buddhist model of the mind, the mental consciousness, our thoughts and feelings and emotions, not our sensory consciousness. Buddha makes a clear distinction that he divides all the thousands of thoughts and feelings and emotions we have into three categories. And initially it seems almost simplistic, because it's not like complex like we have in modern psychiatry. You've got negative, neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based states of mind, which are the source of all our suffering and the source of the dumb things we do with our body and speech that harm others, and which in the long term for the Buddha then produce our future suffering. And then we have the positive, valid, reasonable states of mind that are the source of our happiness and are the basis of what we do to help others. And the third lot, I like to call these the mechanics, and it's a good way to put it. It's like all the states of mind that we need to function, whether you're a murderer or a meditator. If you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration, you need good memory, you good discrimination. If you don't have clear discrimination, you'll kill the wrong person. You know, so these are the kind of the mechanics of the mind, but the stuff that we really need to learn to understand so deeply to be a Buddhist, to be our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it. We have to learn to first identify theoretically the neurotic, deluded states of mind, the disturbing states of mind, and then the positive, valid ones. And this is not a way we talk in the modern psychology. It sounds very kind of moralistic to us. We get a bit nervous, you know, it sounds like good and bad, and we don't like to think this way. But the Buddha's one is just very experiential. If we check the last time we were angry, anxious, depressed, jealous, we know it was utterly miserable. So one of the key qualities the unhappy states of mind has, and this is evident, is that they're disturbing. And one of the terms they use is they're disturbing emotions. But the other one, which is really precise in describing how they function, is that they cause us to be delusional. So it is not so obvious, it's not so unobvious. If I'm in love with Fred, We know that's called attachment. And attachment, its main function is to over-exaggerate Fred's deliciousness, to over-exaggerate his function in making me happy. We understand that. So Buddha says that's delusional. You're not seeing Fred as he really is. You're seeing your own projection. You're seeing your own fantasy. So then when Fred gives me up for a younger version, now it changes into anger. And now Fred looks like the most horrible monster on the planet. And I believe he's the cause of all my suffering. See, that's a delusion as well. So we swing wildly between these two main delusions, Buddha says. And these are the essence of all of our suffering. These are the root of all the other thousands of delusions that Buddha says we have. And in fact, there's this elaborate map of the mind. They talk about 84,000 distinct different neurotic states of mind. And this is coming from these Indians more than 3,000 years ago. And where they got this information, where they mapped the mind, is not the brain. They mapped the internal cognitive process itself. And this is the job of being a Buddhist, to using meditation, studying the Buddhist model, and then beginning to unpack and unravel and identify. And the crucial job is, given that we're trying to get rid of the delusions and grow the virtues, you've got to distinguish between them. And this is the job we have to do. This is the job every day of being a Buddhist, distinguishing between the neurotic states of mind and the valid ones. And this is very hard, because they're mixed together like a big soup right now. So the three main delusions is a lovely phrase in Buddhism. It's the three poisons. Let's call them the three toxic emotions. And they're the essence of all the other 84,000 subsumed to these three. And they're ego grasping. It's like a hierarchical relationship. Ego grasping, a colloquial term for the primordial delusion, the deepest misconception, this misconception of a concrete, solid, separate, bereft, unhappy, concrete me. This is the hardest one to uproot. On the basis of this, it gives rise to this bottomless pit of this emotional hunger attachment, that to get what that fantasy me wants. And that's the motor that drives us throughout our life. And the millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day. That's the third one, aversion. And that's multifaceted too. So attachment is emotional hunger, manipulation, craving, exaggerating, controlling, manipulating, expecting, and possessing. All of those we understand. That's the function of attachment. Why? Because we're convinced I'm nothing, and when I get that, I'll get happy. And then aversion is this panic attack when it doesn't get what it wants, and there's a spectrum there as well, all the way from volatile anger to irritation, annoyance, frustration, upset, all the way to despair and depression. And we run between these like two drunken sailors 1,000 times a day. And the tragedy is we only notice them when they're shouting, that's the tragedy. So Buddha says, when we can start to handle these, we've really got a handle on our own mind. And the key function, they're disturbing and they are causing us to not be in touch with reality. That's the essence of it. And it's, when we think of it, we can really see it's true. This is the day-to-day job of being a Buddhist, day-to-day. And all the other delusions come as a result.
And the Buddhist view is that if you could free yourself from delusions, then even if you have negative karma, it's not possible to ripen at that moment. Is that correct?
When you've cut the root, when you've cut this ego grasping, as we know, that's referred to as realizing emptiness. When you've cut the root delusion, this misconception of this primordial, concrete, separate, independent self, then you're climbing out of your samsara into your nirvana, honey. You can't fall back after that. You've got more work to do, but you really made this paradigm shift in your mind now. You see everything profoundly differently, and it's really, your suffering is, is huge. It doesn't exist hardly anymore. It's an amazing shift psychologically. It's not some mystical thing, And the thing is, because of these delusions, because of these misconceptions, these voices of the I, this attachment and aversion and the others, and they're all panic-stricken. They're rooted in fear, Scott. This is what Buddha says. They're rooted in fear. And as Lama Yeshe says, when we realize emptiness, there is no fear. This is bizarre to us in our culture. I mean, they're driven by fear and panic. No wonder we're so much suffering. That's the primordial day-to-day suffering. Forget future suffering, And so when, on the basis of these delusions, we then use our body and speech, the servants of our mind, to do dumb things to harm others. We don't kill and lie and steal because we love people. We kill and lie and steal because we're full of panic and attack, and we're having a panic attack and feel resentful and hurt. And this is how we perpetuate the misery. So by giving up, first of all, your body and speech, control your body and speech, abide by the laws of karma, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Why? Because I don't want future suffering. Then you can get to high school, next level, and now you can start to unpack and unravel your mind. And then you can, and that's the progress you make. And then the result of this, you become more content, you become more happy, you become like my friend in prison. She became wise, stable, content, and therefore more compassionate, therefore more empathetic and more capable. That's the point, Delusions are like living in hell, and we can get rid of them. That's Buddha's amazing point. They're not at the core of our being, Scott. That's what Buddha's telling us.
You mentioned compassion a few times, and I want to go a little deeper with you with the relationship of karma to compassion, because on the way that we learn the Buddhist path, in our tradition, karma comes earlier when you're thinking a little bit more just about yourself and creating a more ethical life for yourself and better results in your own mind.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit of when compassion comes in and how that relates to karma.
Well, if you look at the whole path, the way the Tibetans have packaged it, as we know, it's very it's incremental, it's very coherent. And like any body of knowledge, you start at junior school, you go to high school, you go to university, you go to postgraduate. That's a nice analogy. We know that, of course, Lama Tsongkhapa in the 14th century didn't call it that. He called it, as Lama Zopa politely, respecting the lineage, would say the first level of practice is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, I call it junior school. So that's where your nuts and bolts of karma, you at least stop harming sentient beings. You stop sowing more negative seeds in your mind because you don't want future suffering. And that's often we skip over this. It is for ourselves, but we shouldn't skip over this. We should it's like you want to be healthy, so you eat good food. No one accuses you of being selfish. When you know what causes good health, now you can have compassion. Same here. So I've got to first get the nuts and bolts of karma down, abide by the laws of karma, control my body and speech, learn to control my mind by going to high school and become my own therapist. I am the recipient. I am the beneficiary of this. I become more stable, more fulfilled, more content, more happy. Now I'm removing also at the same time the veils from my eyes. And now I can see, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. This happens naturally. As you start to get yourself out of your own misery, you realize that everyone is suffering. Everyone's driven by delusions. Everyone is driven by the law of karma, and we are all ignorant of it. And so we run around harming each other and blaming everybody else, and we go crazy. So you've got to do some work first yourself. Then it's easy to start having compassion for others, It's disappeared. Yeah. I can't see you, Scott. What happened to your face?
That's strange. Hold on. Let me change my camera just a second.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
In the meantime,
yes,
I'll
Steve.
step in. Oh, there we go. Look at that.
That's a different view.
Yeah. Are there any questions, Stephen, already?
Yes, I'm gonna we have a question from Facebook, and so the question is, and you're kind of touching upon it, as you're kind of delving into how much suffering there is in the world, and where this becomes more and more apparent to us. The question is, how do we live a life with less attachment when everyone around you is suffering from such attachment? How do you yourself try to endeavor to live a life with less of that when everybody around you is struggling in the same way?
Well, I mean, it's like the analogy would be if we're all overeating and eating the wrong food and we're all doing it together. Don't disappear, Stephen. You've disappeared. Oh, I'm not talking to you, I suppose. I'm talking to everybody.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Stay there. So it's like if all of us are eating wrong food and we sort of vaguely know it and we're all miserable together, and then you start to learn good nutrition, then you get some enthusiasm to realize, oh my God, I found a method has not been so miserable. So then it gives you courage. First of all, let's say it's alcoholism. That's when it's difficult. Let's say you're so overwhelmed with attachment to alcohol, you cannot run around starting to help other alcoholics yet. You've got to remove yourself from other people because it's too overwhelming for you. You've got to be very wise. And so the same with any of our negative habits. If I've got lots of anger, I can't hang around with other angry people. I'll go crazy. So you've got to be aware of where you're at. And so then you've got to work on, but when you work on yourself and you get more courage, then you can start to help other people. But if you're around everybody else and it drags you down to hell as well. So we've got to be very wise about what we can handle. So of course, my friends in prison don't have that luxury. So they don't have the luxury to leave the prison. They've jumped in the deep end and they've got to really work on themselves. But if we've got the choice, if you're in a lousy relationship, and this is just a good example. If you're in a lousy relationship and you've got an abusive partner, but you're full of attachment and neediness and you keep going back like a moth to a flame, you can't do anything. You're absolutely a disaster. You've got to have the courage to make a decision. I better get out of here, and then you work on yourself. Then you can be more stronger. You can then learn to know how to help other people. It's not easy. Otherwise, everything drags us down. It's no good at all. We've got to be conscious of where we're at,
So I'm going to turn the same question over to Scott. Scott, you've worked in some pretty dynamic and intense environments. And as somebody who's kind of dedicated their life to embark upon this path, inevitably you're going to be working in an environment perhaps where perhaps everybody around you is not on such a path. How do you begin? What strategies have helped you as you've kind of brought that, maybe the same question, you know, how do you live with less attachment when you're surrounded by people with so much attachment? How do you implement that in the life experiences that you've had?
Well, I'm also a person with a lot of attachment, but and thinking about the few times I've been able to apply it, I think, you know, realizing that your happiness is more important than these external goals, you know, like Venerable Robina was saying, like they're not really, they don't correlate with each other, like achieving your external goals and inner happiness are not aligned. So I know I had a big corporate job for a while and really had to deal with a lot of very intense situations. And I found, you know, this, what we learn in mind training, a little bit of just giving the benefit to others, which it sounds really easy to say that. And I fail at doing it most of the time. But at the few times I have been able to, that was the cause of happiness. You know, like I recently actually got into a conflict with my neighbor. My neighbor wanted to do something, you know, we really didn't want it as a family, you know, next door. And it was this conflict for quite some time. And then finally, you know, I just realized how much it was disturbing my mind. And I just told him he can have it, you know, like it's better. It's just better to give. And it's very easy to say that, but to actually do it yourself, you know, it just comes every once in a while, you're actually able to do it. And it really is the cause of happiness. My mind is so much more peaceful. Giving him the thing I was fighting for, you know, 18 months. And the same thing at work, right?
That's putting it in terms of the levels of practice.
Yeah.
That's compassion wing. That's university. And if you're, let's say, if your mind was so overwhelmed by resentful and you're feeling like a victim, there's no way you could do that. But because you've done the work on your mind, it dawned on you that who the hell are you causing suffering to? Who are you harming? Yourself, you know? And that's the biggest tragedy we have in our culture. We think I have the right to be angry. I have the right to be jealous. We're so disconnected from ourselves, we can't see the suffering we're causing ourselves, which is such an eye-opener. And that's what my friend in prison, she realized that she didn't want to live in this misery, you know, which is so sublime and so extraordinary and so courageous, actually. And then we've got the ability, like you did, was let him have it, you know. That's so huge, Scott. That's amazing.
But then the thing is, like, I think this is where the more formal Buddhist practice really comes in. You know, I'd love to hear Venerable Robina's comments on this after, you know, I share my own little experience. It's just that you are putting things into a pipeline in your mind. Like this is what Rick Hansen was saying, you know, you're always programming your mind. So we do all kinds of practices, some visualization, some very analytical, like just thinking about karma every day. You know, that's part of what most of us on this call do. We do that as part of our morning. We think about all these things we're talking about right now. And I think it's just surprising, you know, it surprises me myself when I respond in that compassionate, let it go away. And I think, how did that happen? What is the cause? But because of the education we have, the kind of teachings you give, I know the cause, which is all of that work of thinking about the logic of cause and effect, like you're teaching right now, right?
No, it's so true, Scott. It's so true. And that's when we can have confidence. You know, it's very interesting. The Buddhist, the Tibetan word for meditation, the verb, and this is another whole kettle of fish now because we have these very weird ideas of meditation. It's okay, we can do that. But the Buddha's view, that the word meditate is actually the verb to familiarize, to become familiar with something. That's very surprising to us because we think of some cosmic thing you do when you close your eyes. But the real function of meditation is programming your mind in virtue and wisdom, familiarizing your mind in virtue and wisdom, and defamiliarizing your mind in delusions and nonsense. So it's like learning to become this marvelous person. That's the function of the different kinds of meditation. That's the purpose of it. That's the psychological purpose, you know. So that's the process. That's the process. Familiarizing our mind. That's how you become a musician. You keep practicing and suddenly when the time comes, you're able to do it. Wow, surprise. Same as you just example. Perfect example. But I think what's interesting, I don't know, Stephen, any more questions there before I wanted to talk about more practical, the karma, just the principles about karma a little bit more, but never mind.
Yes, and I've asked if there's a follow-up for the first question I asked about attachment in a world of attachment, lessening attachment in a world of attachment. But we do have one within the room here, so I'm going to call on Lynn Sonnenberg. Lynn, you have a question that's along this line as well.
Good. Go, darling.
Hello, very venerable.
Hello, darling.
It feels like this is not coming in a nice, how shall I say it? It's not following on to anything you've said a second ago. So I'm just going to jump in.
Okay.
Is it accurate for me to perk up after I reflect on a negative experience by thinking, oh, good, that karmic seed is over, that karma is gone? Is that accurate to do? Am I training?
Okay, let's talk about it. Okay, so the idea, so this law of karma, and remember, it's not God's law. Okay, I want to say this before too. I'll get to your point. The view we tend to have, like I said before, is it's a law coming from God, a creator, something created, something made up. But there's no equivalent like that in Buddhism. This stuff that we're talking here are natural laws, like botany and math. They're natural laws, and a person called the Buddha and anybody else who's followed his methodology can literally observe these things and prove them to ourselves eventually. That's the whole point for the Buddha. It's not a question of believing in it. So this natural law within which we run daily, which is why we should learn this law. If it's running us, we better learn it. Then it's basically, it functions in different ways. There are 4 ways our present actions ripen in the future. One way is the type of rebirth we get, which is huge for the Buddha. So as humans, we must have won the lottery for the Buddha. We have, due to strong habit of non-harming, in particular, specifically non-killing, and even more specifically, practice in the framework, as Lama Zopa says, of living in vows of ethics. And that's another whole discussion. We might have time, we might not. It's very actions done in the context of vows are very potent, very powerful for the Buddha, Then the second way our karma ripens is in terms of our habits. We come into this life programmed with our tendencies. And that's a shock to us. We think they came from mummy and daddy and the monkeys and the grandpa and grandma. Not at all. Mummy and daddy might share our tendencies, but ours, we come with them. We come programmed into this life at the first second of conception with our past habits. So they're our anger, our love, our being good at music, our psychosis, our virtue. This fundamental for the Buddha is this fundamental. Next one, the way karma ripens is a bit goes out there, and that's in terms of how we're seen and treated by others. We can see we're very social beings. We keep bumping into each other life after life. So the way we're seen and treated by others, this too is the fruit of our past karma. And even fourth, even the way the physical world impacts upon us, environmental karma, they call it. So every tiny action we ever do, think, or say can have any one of these 4 results. So Buddha's quite literally saying we are literally the creator from life to life of our own experiences, literally. So, so then one analogy that I use is about seeds and fruits. Then basically we're trying to pull out the weeds and grow the flowers. So if, we come into this life with billions of karmic seeds, and we come into this life with particular habits, and the karmic habits inform how we respond to things, and also present in front of us what happens to us. Everything that happens to us, as Lama Zopa puts it, is our own karmic appearance. We just think, who is this wretched person I'm meeting? Who is this nice person I'm meeting? We think it's good luck and bad luck. There is no such concept in Buddhism. There cannot be such a thing if it's a natural law as good luck and bad luck. It can't be random, which is a pretty powerful concept. So whatever we meet, whoever we see, whatever we hear, however we interpret it, the way we respond to it, how that people treat us, this is due to our past actions. So one simple example, non-killing, strong habit of non-killing, 1, produces a human rebirth. 2, it will produce in that life, or even indeed, certainly it might be in the human one, the tendency not to kill, which is pretty rare. Most humans have a tendency to kill. 3, it'll produce the experience similar to the cause of not killing, which is you won't die young and you won't get sick. Well, guess what? That's us so far. 4, even environmentally, the non-killing will produce that you'll be born into an environment that will nourish you and not harm you. So flip that over, then killing can ripen as a type of suffering rebirth. We haven't got that one. We've got a human one. 2, lots of people get born in this life as a result of killing. that will tend to keep killing. You have a tendency to kill. 3, you will get killed or die young. 4, the physical world will harm you. You'll have allergies. The peanuts will kill you. The food is polluted. The air is polluted. So everything any sentient being experiences in terms of the environment, experiences at the hands of others, your own mind, and even your own humanity. We are the boss. We are the creator. This is a pretty incredible concept. So if you come into this life and you're working your way on your mind, it's like you're cleaning. It's like you're going to the gym. You're cleaning up. You come home from the gym with muscles you didn't know you had, but you don't complain because you know it's the result of your hard work. You're cleaning up. If you go on a good diet, you go on a good cleansing diet, you get burps and farts. You're not disappointed. It's the dirt coming out. So yes, when you start to practice, and every time something bad happens, it's the fruit of a negative karma. Well, you've just finished it. I did a conference one time in Miami. It sounds like a joke. There was me, a Catholic, a rabbi, and a Lutheran. And the topic was, why do bad things happen to good people? Yeah. Well, I gave my talk all about karma. And then the rabbi clapped. He said, we have the same view. He was a Kabbalah rabbi. And he said, we have a saying, every time something bad happens, you go, fantastic, one less debt to repay. So it's like that. If you go to the gym, every time you push yourself and the muscles hurt, you are happy because you're changing. So that's the really powerful way of seeing practice. And Scott's example is good. When the bad thing happens, a person, there's this disharmony. But every time the bad thing happens, it's one less negativity. You've just cleaned that one up. You just finished it. It's a very powerful view to have, instead of thinking it's not fair, poor me, I'm such a victim, don't do it to me, and you just keep creating more misery. So absolutely, yes, it's a very powerful view to have, and it's got some logic to it. But including then, when you start to practice, you start to see your mind more, and often we think my mind's getting worse. But even in the texts, they say one of the first signs of success at the first of the 9 stages of single point of concentration, shamatha, is that you think your mind's getting worse, but it's not. You're just noticing the rubbish more. So it's a good sign. And I mean, one of our friends is a meditator, Roger, an Australian monk years ago, not Lama Zopa's Roger, another one. He's a serious meditator, 3-year, 4-year retreats, really full-on practitioner. And he said at some point he was out of his brain with rage and anger. He thought he was going crazy. And he went to Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed. Fantastic, he said. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. So it's like going to the gym. You're glad when the bad things happen because you're cleaning up your act. You're pulling out the weeds. It's a great way to see it, but it's a tough one. Absolutely.
So I want to go a little further into these 4 types of karma, because
yes,
the action similar to cause seems the most palatable and understandable.
Start again. I didn't hear you, Scott. What?
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear the words, yeah.
So the action similar to cause seems like the most palatable and understandable to anyone.
Yes.
That the more we do something, the more we tend to do something.
Yes, exactly.
The result similar to the cause becomes a little more confusing. And I want to ask you about something more practical about that, which is just how to not feel guilt for when bad things happen to you, to think, oh, I deserve that. We just talked about the nice view, which is to think, oh, wonderful, this ripened and I don't have to experience it again. But how to avoid feeling guilty, like, oh, how to do this? And even worse, how to avoid blaming other people when we see something bad happening to another person and just dismiss it and say, oh, that's their karma.
I understand. Well, I think guilt, we've got to really unpack it psychologically, Scott. Guilt is, I'm a bad person, isn't it? Oh my God, I'm a bad person. So now it's kind of an irrational, it's rooted in ego grasping, and it's an irrational, Buddha would say, an irrational response to something. If you just ate food that was harming, you've just discovered you've got diabetes and you suddenly ate some sugar, then the first response you'd have would be an intelligent one. Oh my God, I can't believe I just eaten sugar. Quick, what can I do about it? But what guilt is, oh, imagine if you just ate the sugar. Oh, I'm such a bad person. And so when you analyze what guilt is, it's really having in your mind that someone else told you shouldn't eat sugar, and now you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get punished. And in a way, then you stay stuck. And so you've eaten sugar, you're going to get sick, and you sit there just thinking, oh, I'm a bad person. Oh, I'm a bad person. It's completely bizarre and useless state of mind, because it's a function of ego. And it's anger, but you're the result. So you're the object. So look, if I'm angry at you, it's exactly the same. You know, guilt says I did this and I did that and I'm a bad person. And I say anger, Scott, you did this and you did that and you're a bad person. But if you analyze it, there's no benefit, there's no action, there's nothing you can do. Whereas if you've eaten sugar, the first thing you'll think is, my God, quick, I must get the antidote. I must fix it. And that's a very powerful grown-up attitude. And this is the whole process of purification. Regret instead of guilt. So, you know, given that I don't want future suffering, then I have to acknowledge that I ate sugar because I don't want it to stay in my body. So I've got to quickly apply the antidote. So it's an attitude of self-respect. It's an attitude of kindness to yourself. But guilt is like loathing. Guilt is anger. And this is one of the functions of ego grasping. And that's what's so tragic. So either anger or guilt, they're the same function, but they're useless. You sit in misery and there's no action and there's nothing to fix. You can't fix it. You just get worse. So it's a function of ego. We get stuck and paralyzed and either blame somebody else or blame ourselves, you know. And this is a nightmare. That's why the purification practice is so powerful. So I remember His Holiness was asked one time about what's the difference between regret, this attitude we have of the purification practice, and guilt. And he said it this way, very clear. He said, guilt, you look in the past and you say, I did this and I did that. And then we immediately conclude, oh, I'm a bad person. And I think this is very rooted in the dualistic view of punishment and reward. I'm a naughty girl, mummy will find me and I'll be found out and I'll get punished, because we're living our lives we've internalized God's view, mummy's view, the police's view, the government's view, grandma's view, and we're running around trying to be a good girl and not get caught. So this is dualistic idea of punishment and we're living with it. We created this ridiculous view. So guilt is I'm a bad person. But whereas regret, as His Holiness says, you look in the past and you say, I did the same, I did this and I did this, but you regret it because you know I don't want suffering. So then you think, what can I do to fix it? It's so proactive, you know, and it's self-respectful. Just like if you're trying to play the piano and you play the wrong note, you don't go, oh, I'm a bad person, I played the wrong note, and you stay stuck. You quickly fix it and you play the right note because you want to become a musician. So it's a more practical view and it's a self-respectful view. But we all know guilt very well and we get absolutely paralyzed by it. But it's a function of ego grasping. We've got to unpack it and see it. And it's related very much to thinking I want to be a good girl because I don't want to be punished, you know? Do you understand?
Yeah, and I think it took me a long time to really understand this difference. I remember it really hit home with Geshe Dakpa explaining the same thing, that, you know, guilt is this, you know, ego. It just creates more negativity when you're guilty.
Exactly.
But regret is just very logical. Like, I would rather not have done that thing, and what can I do to, you know, diminish or stop?
But I would argue that it's not even I would rather not have done it. It is, oh my God, what a fool. I didn't realize then what I've done. And I didn't realize that I didn't realize I'd eaten sugar. To even say I shouldn't have done it, that's also like guilt. Oh my God, what a fool. You acknowledge it immediately. I did eat sugar. What a fool. How can I fix it? Not even I shouldn't have done it. Not even that. That's guilt. Not even that. That's foolish. It's meaningless. And we live in that one. We are paralyzed by that one.
Just clearly realizing the harm that the action.
Clearly realizing we did that action out of ignorance, and we have, it's like compassion for yourself. What a fool I was. I didn't realize what I was doing. Quickly, how can I fix it as quickly as possible? Because that seed's growing already and I don't want the fruit to come. It's a really proactive, really self-respectful, intelligent attitude. And it takes time to cultivate it because we're instinctively got guilt or anger. Either way, we have them. It's very strong. It's ego's function, you know.
This seems like a perfect moment then to talk about purification, because once you start to clearly see cause and effect and to recognize, you know, the harmful actions that you do, then what do you do about them, right? How do you
karma? Because everything is impermanent and everything is empty of intrinsic nature, nothing is set in stone. Whereas as ego grasping believes there's a concrete me, believes I'm a bad person, over exaggerates the guilt, the shame, the anger, the bad qualities. We're fixated on them and we believe this is who I am. This is our terrible tragedy. But there is no karma we can't change. There is no thought we can't change. There is no thing we can't change. So it's very powerful and very optimistic. And these 4 steps are psychologically very intelligent. The first is acknowledge I did it. Second, first I regret it because I don't want suffering. It's for my sake. I'm sick of this habit. I don't want that habit. Then I rely upon a doctor. For us, that's the Buddha. But the second part is I now have compassion for those I harmed. That comes second. Then I do some kind of practice to purify. And then I make a decision to change. It's a practical process. I acknowledge I played the wrong note. I realize, I then rely on Bach's music. I then determine not to do it again. It's a natural process of how you learn something. But ego gets in the way and we stay stuck. Oh, I'm a bad person. If you say to a person who's really angry, you can change it. No. What do you mean I can change? Not possible. I mean, that's the irony of ego. We really loathe ourselves and we make everything so concrete. That's the tragedy. We don't think we can change. That's why we're so stubborn. That's why we're so stuck in our misery. It's so painful.
Do you want to talk a little more about steps of purification? When it's useful to purify? Is that something to do, in the morning, in the evening, right when something happens?
Well, I mean, if you're playing the piano and you play the wrong note all the time, you don't wait till the end of the day to regret it. You do it right then best. Yeah. It's logical, If you plant the wrong seed in the garden, you don't wait till the end of the day to fix it. You fix it. The sooner you pull it out of the garden, the sooner you fix it, the quicker it won't grow. So that demands a lot of kind of awareness of our mind and a recognition of this law of karma. And this is what is hard because we don't have a sense. We're very addicted to the view, which is the dualistic view of punishment and reward, that if no one sees me do it, we got away with it. That's very instinctive and it's very hard to get past that. We have also have a very strong sense of a concrete me. So we don't have this recognition that every tiny thing I think and do and say is producing me moment by moment. We think I'm set in stone, And so to realize emptiness a little bit is so powerful to understand karma. It's necessary, but it takes time, We don't have a sense that I'm producing myself moment by moment. We don't have that sense. And we have a sense of not being found out, not being caught. That's the way ego works. That's the way guilt works. These are all the symptoms of ego grasping, the root delusion. So karma is the first level of practice, but it's one of the first logical reasons to prove emptiness. It's dependent arising, that everything that we think and do and say has consequences. And that's something we don't think naturally. And our culture very much so. We don't think what we do and say has any consequences unless someone catches us. And we certainly never think that what we think has consequences, because we think that's our private little world and I can think what I like. I mean, that's so nihilistic. It's unbelievable, So to get a sense of cause and effect, which is so dynamic, really does take time. It just takes time, even though it's the first level of practice.
Yeah, so it's like the many stories of the great Buddhist masters who really understood cause and effect, and even the most minor transgression, they would immediately stop and do purification practice.
And the thing is, Scott, we know this when it comes to anything. If you're an architect and you do the slightest wrong measurement, you just don't think, oh, it doesn't matter, no one's going to notice. You know that every tiny thing counts. That's the details, and that's dependent arising. So we know if you're playing the piano, look at the level of perfection we have to practice. The tiniest wrong thing. Look at we understand the details matter, but when it comes to our mind and our actions, we're completely opposite. We don't have that thought at all. So as we progress in understanding interdependence, we will then have that incredible view about every tiny thought counts, every tiny word counts, every tiny piece of speech counts. It produces me, not to mention the consequences on the outside world. It's very powerful. Stephen got a question.
Yeah, on the topic of purification, this is perfect timing. From Facebook, somebody writes, I recently had an infestation of ants and killed many of them. What can I do to purify an action like this?
I understand. This is not an easy one because we're surrounded by all these wretched creatures, aren't we, that we don't like and think they disturb our lives. So in general, what we're describing here is that, any action we do, first of all, the first level of a negative action, very simple, straightforward, fairly evident, is an action we do that harms another. It's not the only negative action. All the actions we do in our own mind can be negative. Things that no one else sees us do can be negative. But the very first level, Buddha would exhort us not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, because they're actions that harm others. They're heavy-duty extra heavy negative actions. So then this is why, as Lama Zopa says, with the purification practice, which is a marvelous psychological practice, we're insane not to do it every day. And answering Scott's question earlier, that the end, every second of the day if you can, but the best to do it as a nice formal practice before you go to bed. It's a really excellent way to, and it's a very powerful practice that you kind of, you're learning to be your own friend. So these 4 steps. So then, you know, you've killed the ants. So then the first step would be you regret. And what that means is, well, you know, I killed the ants. I didn't think about karma. I didn't think about consequences. You know, I just annoyed these wretched ants annoy me, these, you know, blah, blah, blah. So I killed a lot of them. So then I think, well, they're ants, they're sentient beings. I killed them. I've got some karmic connection with these creatures. You know, they're sort of, these are my ants, baby. You know, I killed them. They must have harmed me. So what am I going to do? I don't want these seeds to ripen in my mind, because every action I do will bring fruits, and killing is not a cool action. So then you regret it, you own it. I did kill them, and not trying, oh, well, it's not my fault and I couldn't help it and that kind of thing. That's not the point. You ate the sugar. You can't say to the doctor, well, I couldn't help it. Can you get me off the hook, please, and I don't get diabetes? No, I'm sorry, it's a natural law. So then the first step is you own it. You know, you own, I did kill the ants. What a fool, I didn't realize. So I deeply regret it. But the first reason is interesting, because you know what? I don't want to have suffering in the future. I don't want to get killed. I don't want to die young. I don't want to get born as an ant. And this sounds a joke to us, but this is the first one, is compassion for yourself. Then the next step, well, whom can I turn to? Whom can I rely upon? Who's the doctor who can give me the methods I can use to purify this? So then we turn to the Buddha, the second step. There's a way you do this. And the other aspect of the second step is now you have compassion for the ants. I mean, sure, were not happy getting slaughtered, you know, died of poison or got stood on or something. So you have compassion for these creatures. So you purify for their sake as well. The first one is for yourself. Now for the sake of the ants. The third step is you do this different practices. The third one is called the antidote. So in your daily life, you can apply the antidote. Every time you help other beings, you're purifying the habit of killing. You can't bring the ants back, they're gone, you know, but you can purify the tendency to kill, and you can cultivate compassion. But here in the meditation, there's a particular practice we do where you visualize the Buddha, you say a certain mantra, and it's all your mind doing the work. Your mind purifies, you know, as Lama Yeshe says, we create negativity with our mind. So we purify it by creating positivity with our mind. And then the fourth step is the most important. You vow not to do it again. You know, you play the wrong note, whom can I rely upon? You acknowledge it. You don't say, I didn't play the wrong note, really, it's not my fault. No, you acknowledge it, you rely upon bark, and then you vow not to play the wrong note again. That's how you change your mind. And there's no karma we can't purify. Lama Zopa says, by doing this purification practice and relying upon the Buddha especially, it puts atomic bombs under these habits, and it literally pulls out the weeds. It cleans up your mind. You know, it's very powerful. And it's a psychological practice. Don't think of it as like religion, you know. Karma is psychological. It's your mind. You're programming your mind in a new way. It's marvelous, you know.
One of the aspects of karma, Venerable Robina, one of the other reasons we're encouraged to purify right away is because of this aspect of karma, that it increases. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is there any way, you know, without being enlightened, to understand this aspect?
Let's talk about that, but also in general, more how it's possible. Yeah. This is very hard for us. How is it possible, we think, you know, that by doing actions now, that I can die and then get a new rebirth based on my karma? This is the one that I think is the most shocking one for our culture. And it's only because if we're Christian and we believe God is in charge, and in a sense, we have the view of karma when it comes to Christianity, not from before, but certainly we know we're going to have a future experience, but it's usually to do with God sending me somewhere or whatever, but we know our actions will bring that result. So that's a bit similar. But the point here is there's no view of a punisher or a rewarder. So the Buddha's point is every tiny thing the way to really try to get some sense, that's getting too esoteric, I think. I mean, the Buddha's view of, you know, you study in the Vajrayana teachings, the more advanced teachings about the physical universe, which is the basis of Tibetan medical system. It's similar to the Ayurvedic system. It's similar to the Chinese system. We've got this subtler nervous system, this subtler physical energy, you know. So all these different creatures, like an ant, a human, there are disembodied beings called spirits or gods. They're all sentient beings who have, due to their own actions, have created the cause for their mind to take on a certain level of physicality and a certain level of consciousness. So then, you know, this subtle physical energy we have, the Buddha's view is this view, everything we think and do and everything we think even programs our mind, which also impacts upon our physical energy. Every single tiny thing we do, and it then causes our future mind to continue, because the mind is endless. So then if you're born, if you create lots of negativity, you're programming your mind with killing, with stealing, with harming, with lying. And because you've killed and stolen from people and harmed sentient beings, you know, you're going to meet them again, because that's how we create the cause. We bump into each other again. But the other one is, when you die, at the time of death, all the karmic seeds are in like this bank vault in our mind. And the way we die determines the karmic seed that will be triggered, because there's no seeds and no actions we do that go astray. So if in our case, we must have died peacefully. So one of our virtuous karmic seeds was triggered. And at the time, even before we stopped breathing, the karmic seed that in our case was the one that would cause us to get born in our mummy's fallopian tube 6 weeks later, 8 weeks later, when she hopped into bed with our daddy. This is due to strong karmic history with those particular people. And this is the thing, is you don't need a person who runs this. We tend to think God runs the universe, he decides things. There's no law, there's no view like that in Buddhism. This is a natural law that plays itself out naturally. So our virtue created the cause when we died, and our mind went eventually to our new mummy's human womb when she hopped in bed with the daddy, and we got the human body. Second, all the karmic seeds triggered that were our tendencies. Third, all the karmic seeds that produce our experiences, the people we're going to meet, how they treat us, whether they believe our words, whether they love us, whether they give us things, whether they hate us, whether they murder us, whatever it is. This is due to karma. There's no experience we have. There's no sentient being we meet. There's no negative thing that happens. There's no positive thing that happens that we did not create the cause. And this is the point. It's a natural law. There's no one running this thing. There's no boss. There's no punisher. There's no rewarder. So it does take time to think about it. It's quite shocking to us. Quite shocking. I mean, if you're a materialist, you believe your mother and father made you. If you're a Christian, you believe God made you. There's always going to be a boss, you know, not for the Buddha. It's a natural law. It's a natural law. All beings, all universes, the hell realms, the spirits, the humans, the animals, we are all the product of our own past. We create our own reality. It's a pretty, I mean, I think it's a delicious view. I think it's great. I love being the boss, you know, it's wonderful. I think it's great. Of course, it's all there theoretically. We have to learn the mechanics of it first. And then the way to apply it, that's the point. That's the key. Not just think, oh, it's karma. Well, if you know there's a law called botany and you can learn to get the most magnificent garden, then you better learn botany. Then you can be in charge of this law. And that's exactly the point. We are in charge of this. We can determine our next life. We can determine, if you want to be rich next life, you be generous now, okay? If you want a handsome, beautiful body, you better be moral and not harm others. If you want people to believe your words, you better tell the truth. If you want to have, healthy, you better not kill. This is the logic of it. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's a natural law. That's the thing to keep thinking. It's a natural law. So if it is a natural law and it's all been seen by the great beings, it's all there in the literature. You better learn it, baby. It's not mystical. It's not coming from on high. It's not cross your fingers and hope for the best. So it's really powerful view. It's really powerful, and it brings incredible accountability. You cannot blame anybody, It's you're the boss. You're the boss, baby. And then you can help others. That's the point about it.
So while we're talking about this, multi-life evolution of karma, as a natural law, you talked about the 4 types of karma, and one of those is environmental karma.
Yeah.
Right? The type of environment that you're born into. This is obviously of great concern to everybody today. Could you talk a little bit about our environment and climate change, and what were the causes for having an environment that's being degraded, and also how can we create the causes for healing our environment?
Exactly. Well, that's the point. Of course, initially it's so abstract to us, so esoteric, that if we're born, let's say, in an environment where the water's polluted, the air's polluted, the food's really weak, this is due to the collective karma of all the millions of people who live there from past killing. That's the direct result of killing. If you're born in a desert where nothing grows, that's the result of abusive speech. Of course, it sounds so superstitious to us. It's such a bizarre idea, but this is what the Buddha is saying. Everything, every sentient being thinks and does and says produces our experiences and our environment. So it's fine to put our plastic in the right place and play this and less emissions and blah, blah, blah. But if we keep killing and stealing and lying, we're going to keep creating a garbage environment. So, and also environmental karma takes probably millions of lifetimes to manifest. But so look at COVID-19 now. There's literally a universal sickness. So there's two karmas. There's the people who are experiencing death at the moment. That's the third one, called experiences similar to the cause, where they literally die young. And people who get sick, that's the environmental result. You mightn't die, but if the physical world harms you. So look at the world now. Other human beings, our beloveds, if we kiss them, we might die. So even the physical world now is all the human beings in it, and we're not even allowed to touch each other. That's the collective environmental karma of past killing of all the millions of humans on this planet right now, So this is from millions of lifetimes ago. The karmic results are long-term coming. So we've got to recognize that. So we must continue to practice ethics, because that'll produce future good environments. Meanwhile, obey the laws of the environment and don't pollute and don't do those things. But they're only the secondary conditions. They're not the main causes. The main causes of a lousy environment of 1,000 lifetimes ago, 1,000,000 lifetimes ago, of killing and negative actions and harming others and harsh speech and so on and so forth. This is everything minds do. If you want a boss in the universe for the Buddha, it's all the trillions of beings themselves, and every thought we have brings these four results. We are the collective boss of the universe, and that's the tragedy. We think everybody else is the boss, and we don't think we are, So the environment, yes, long-term karma, and right now, look at it, killing karma, all of us experiencing it. It's quite heavy.
Yeah, and the people on this call, I think probably few of them are, killing or even lying that much.
Now, that's right. No, we're living good lives now. That's right.
But the one that I think a lot about is the harsh speech and divisive speech.
Yeah.
We're in a very divisive time, and
Yeah.
it's such a dominant way that people are communicating now. And I certainly see those problems, in my own behavior, speaking harshly, speaking divisively. And when you look at the laws of karma, like you said, the consequences are quite severe for those things. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those aspects of speech, because a lot of us have tamed, we're even vegetarian and so on, but those aspects of speaking hard and even mostly truthful, but those aspects of speaking harshly and divisively, or even
and I think this is where it's really proof, I think, that we don't realize everything we think and do and say brings consequences. We really feel we have this entitlement. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to say what I like. I'm allowed to criticize Mr. Trump. It's like, and when you see, this is what's interesting. When we analyze that, I'm allowed to, it's like we feel it's permission, and therefore the boss gives us permission and gets us off the hook, and there won't be any consequences. That's the dualistic view of punishment and reward. That's a bit like going to your doctor and please asking her to forgive you for eating sugar. Can you please get me off the hook and so I don't get diabetes? That's schizophrenic. You can't, that's bizarre, It's like saying, can you please stop fire from burning me because I can't help touching it? No, it's a natural law. You've got to be accountable. But allowed to is a child. I'm allowed to be angry. What do you mean I'm allowed to eat sugar? No, if you get diabetes, no, you allowed or not is irrelevant. So it takes us time to realize this accountability we have to have, that every tiny thing I think, say, and do, not 1 millisecond of it goes astray. Every moment of it will produce the person I become. So every second that I say words that are driven by attachment or anger, guess who I am harming? This is not punishment. Forget who you harm outside. But every second I say negative words, I am polluting myself. Every second I say lies, I am harming myself. Every second I use harsh language, I am harming myself. And this is where we skip over this aspect. We think it's all to do with morality and being good to others. We've got to recognize that we are the boss, and that everything we think and do and say is the process that produces the person I become. So when we begin to understand that, we would never want to in 1 second even have an angry thought. So it shows how high this is. And it really takes time to think it. So then it doesn't mean we sit there, become passive and stupid. Get out there, demonstrate. If you don't like Mr. Trump's politics, get out there. But watch your speech like a hawk. Be really skillful in what you say. And if we're going to say things, have it driven by compassion, driven by wisdom, driven by the wish to help people. So we've got to develop the virtuous wish to be of benefit. Use our body, use our speech to be of benefit. Don't have to be little mouse, but has to be driven by positive thoughts, driven by the wish to help. This is what a positive life is,
Yeah. And especially speaking gently and speaking to bring people together. These are the ones I really have to remind myself a lot, especially these days. It's very easy to get divisive and angry, right?
So easy, I know, and it's so easy. It's true. It's just so easy, and this is why it's so incredible to think that, you know, the very first level, junior school, entry level, grade 1 practice is control your body and control your speech. There we are, all these smarty pants Buddhists running around doing empowerments and saying mantras, and which is postgraduate, and we can't even control our speech. It's like we're all back to front. It's so profound to control your speech, you know. I mean, this is what my life's experience has been. I've got really bad behavior, you know. I get into trouble because of it. I remember Lama Yeshe telling me one time, I was complaining with self-pity about myself. And he said, there's nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behavior. And I mean, I know I get into trouble because of my behavior. Many people know me. I get into trouble. So because I can't control my body and speech, you know, I mean well. That's why I felt sorry for myself. Poor me. Nothing wrong with your heart, dear. It's just your behavior. So control your behavior, because behavior is what impacts upon others. And it's hard to see this, because when you think I've got this right to do what I want, you know, we're so self-centered. So controlling our body and speech is, my God, not an easy practice. It's incredible. But this is the ground level practice, living in vows and purifying every day. And if we can do this, we have a stupendous practice if we can do this.
And it also comes out with the people right around you. You know, I was talking to Venerable Sangye Kadro recently, and she told me about something Lama Yeshe said, which is how to measure whether your Buddhist practice is working. And she said that Lama Yeshe said that your relationships improve. Is this right? Are you, yeah, is this right?
Yeah, that's very nice. I love that. That's lovely.
But I think it's a nice check for others on this call who've been practicing for a little while, like me too. You know, you can start to feel good if you practice for a long time in the morning and you do all your practices. But then if you're arguing with your wife and your coworkers and your neighbor, then, you know, it's a sign it's not having an effect, right?
That's true. It's really true, isn't it? And the proof of the pudding has to be that, you know.
Yeah.
It's so true. I know. Looks like Stephen has something to say.
Yes,
the proof is in the pudding. That's a wonderful bookend here as we go into some questions.
Okay.
We'll come back, and there are going to be some questions for both of you and some individually, and I have some questions of my own. The first question is going to be to Venerable Carol Karate, who's in the Zoom room. So she has a question on collective karma.
Yes.
Venerable Robina, thank you so much for, you know, touching on collective karma, and it was really helpful to think about him. And Scott asked about the environmental effects, and one of the things I think about now too, especially when you said, you know, the result of killing from so many, you know, lifetimes ago. What can we do? Is there any purification practice we can do when we talk about like collective karma ripening? You know, or is it again looking at just our own, you know, just guarding our body, speech, and mind? Basically.
I understand. It's a really good point. I mean, this is where I think, and this gets a bit difficult for people who don't have much religious approach to it all, but this is where we can see, can't we? You know, just for people's information, a couple of months ago, Lama Zopa Rinpoche recommended to us monks and nuns of our organization all around the world to devote 24 hours of every Saturday, 24 hours every Saturday in all the different countries, 30-minute increments. We recite a particular prayer that Lama Zopa said was written by some holy being several centuries ago when there was some big epidemic somewhere and nothing worked, and him just reciting this prayer and doing a few Om Mani Padme Hums helped cure the epidemic. Now, this is where, of course, it doesn't, if you're not a religious type of person, it just sounds like superstition. Saying prayers, you're going to heal people. But it seems to me collective karma, there's not much else you can do. And that's why we've got to think about this. But we're doing practices where we invoke the Buddhas, because all the Tibetan Lamas will tell us that any practices we do that bring in the Buddhas, invoke the Buddhas, the use of mantra, the use of prayer. And what prayer is just is words, aspirations, and linking to Buddhas. And what a Buddha is such a powerful being, and there are trillions of beings who have become Buddha who do exist. So invoking their presence and collectively invoking their presence and collectively doing these prayers and practices. I remember the time, I remember when I did TM back in the 70s, and there was this whole thing about if more than 1% of people in a certain place all meditated, it would help shift the energy of the place. So that's sort of what we're talking about here. It seems a more esoteric level, but that's, I think, is one for sure, and that's certainly, as we know, for the Tibetans. They love doing their prayers and practices 24 hours a day for the bigger good. So that's the way, I think, if people have confidence in those kinds of things, they're the practices we can certainly do to help shift the karma, to help purify the collective karma, you know. I think so. Individually doing our own practice is for ourselves, for sure. But I think they're the ones we can do it at a bigger level. And many people feel they want to do something like that. They love the idea of doing prayers and mantras and having pujas and prayers done, you know. So it's many people have a lot of confidence in that. And I think that's the level we really can do practices. We can do that kind of practice for the collective karma, I'd say. Don't you think? Yeah. What else, Stephen?
Scott, I'm gonna just along that, knowing, you know, like all of us, most of us are non-heritage practitioners, and we've just talked about collective karma and what Venerable Robina talked about. How is that navigating this? How do you bring your background and your practice into something like that? Because it does sound very esoteric. Talk about that, and talk about, from your perspective, how this notion of doing a practice that where you may not see the ripened result of it in any way, shape, or form for quite a long time, or even in the way you expect it. How does that translate to you, and how have you learned to incorporate that into what you do?
Was this a question for me?
That's correct. Yeah, for you. Kind of along the, you know, collective karma, the notion of like collective karma in and of itself kind of denotes you have a sense of interconnectedness that quite often society doesn't reinforce. How does that sit with you, and how have you developed faith or practice in that?
I mean, I just really believe our teachers. You know, I think that our teacher, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and teachers like Yeshe and Venerable Rene and Venerable Robina, you know, obviously these concepts I wasn't born just knowing all these concepts about karma. Like a lot of us on this call, you know, I learned them from teachers, but so much of everything else that His Holiness taught and other teachers taught is absolutely true from just a practical application in everyday life. So then these more esoteric aspects like karma, I just logically think, well, is the Dalai Lama lying about this one thing? And of course that's not logical. So the only logical conclusion is that these other things that he's teaching and the Buddha taught and other teachers taught are true. And, you know, they're difficult to understand, and maybe science will verify them in 200 or 300 years. You know, Rick Hansen talks about this. He says science understands the mind today the way we understood physics like 300 years before Einstein. And he said it's very realistic that we actually might even gain a scientific understanding and do experiments to verify, you know, even some of these more esoteric aspects, even of karma. If you did an experiment that lasted, you know, 1,000,000 years or 100,000 years, that's a very long.
That's a very interesting point, Scott. You know, because I feel this is something that I really think is so important. You know, what you're saying is you trust the teacher, and that's really powerful. But it seems to me, and we get this in the scientific world, that if any body of knowledge is valid, if it is valid, then it seems to me absolutely clear that it has to be first coherent theoretically. So that's why we start with a theory. And karma is exactly the same as if you want to learn botany, if you want to learn math, if you want to learn physics, you start with the theory. You have to start with the theory. And then, of course, I can have faith in Einstein, good enough. And most of us only have faith in Einstein. We have not proven E equals MC squared, but we have faith in the people we see, good enough. But if I want to prove it, I have to do it myself. So where do I start? And that's where I remember one time in New Zealand, I think I quoted this before. It was a scientist, in fact, in Nelson, New Zealand, and it was the only time I've ever been asked this question. We all asked the same question, so I remember this question vividly. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? So he was so shocked, and everybody laughed when I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings on relativity to him? Of course you would not, because you know he's done his homework, he's used his noggin, you've checked on his reputation, he's now presenting his findings. He is not asking you to believe him. He is not forcing it down your throat. He did not have a dream or a vision of it. He didn't make it up. He's not speculating. He's done his homework, and he's saying, I've done my work. This is what I observed with my mind. Here is what I found to be true. Here's my methodology. Over to you, baby. Well, that's exactly the Buddha. That's why the starting point has to be, if it is coherent theoretically, You could, I mean, I think even if you study acupuncture, you could pass an exam on acupuncture theory without putting a needle in anybody, and it would be coherent if it's a valid body of knowledge. But we think of religion as hippy trippy, cross your fingers and hope for the best, which is so superstitious. So that's why we've got to squeeze our brains, as Lama Yeshe said. That's why we have to study it, as the Dalai Lama tells us. That's why they study for 20, 30 years in the monastic universities. They squeeze their brains to get the entire theory clear. Then in meditation, you put it into practice. Or as His Holiness says, if you study and practice the Buddhist methodology, and I'm paraphrasing, and you don't just wait till you suddenly realize everything. You prove 1 + 1 is 2 first, then you go to grade 2, you prove the next thing, and then you go and prove multiplication. You tick the boxes as you go. And as he says, if you do the same with Buddhism, you tick the boxes as you go, and then you get to a certain point and you've proved that Buddha's wrong, then you must reject him. That's the clarity of the think, of the intelligence and the mind. That's necessary, and that's the Buddhist approach. And that for me is so tasty. So karma is a coherent worldview, and it's all there in the literature for anybody who wants to study it. And so what do you do with it? You take it as your working hypothesis, and you either prove it's right or you prove it's wrong. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying Buddha's company. So far, so good. You know, that's how I feel.
This is such a good point from Venerable Robina, and I really like it because today there's a lot of cherry picking. You know, there's a lot of taking tiny bits of Buddhism and
it's just laziness. It's laziness, and it's just sentimental rubbish. It's just laziness.
And it's mentioned. It is quite beneficial. Also,
forgive me. We can be a 1% Buddhist. It's okay, but you won't get enlightened. You know, you won't get the whole deal. You won't realize equals MC squared. You'll realize 1 + 1 is 2. Good enough. But if you want the whole deal, you got to jump in the deep end. You don't have to, but that's, you know, it's a coherent body of knowledge. That's the point.
But I really want to reiterate this point that Venerable Robina is making, because it's very, very powerful. And I think many of us on the call had the same experience. Tibetan Buddhism is complicated, and it doesn't immediately fall into place, you know, in the first teaching or the first 10. But when these, you know, dozen or so elements, as you gradually learn them and see how they interrelate, and then also have some small personal experience applying them in your everyday life, the system as a whole proves to be coherent. So what Venerable Robina says, that the system makes theoretical sense, the way that the theory of relativity or Newton's laws of motion and gravity make sense. That is a very, very powerful point, and I think not completely obvious, especially in our like cherry picking reality that we live in today of like Buddhism and spiritual traditions, to really see that to take on the entire Buddhist worldview as a hypothesis, not to take it on as a belief, but take it on as a hypothesis and really deeply study it the way you might study chemistry.
And be prepared for it to be wrong. You're going one step at a time. I'm prepared for Buddha to be wrong, but meanwhile, I'm enjoying his company. And so far, so good. I'm quite content. So it's one step at a time. It's incremental. It's gradual. And we are the boss in this. We are the one who has to do the work. Buddha's done the work. Einstein's done the work. He says, over to you, baby. It's up to you now. So, you know, but we're so intellectually lazy when it comes to science. We say, oh, but it's being proven. Well, excuse me, I haven't proven equals MC squared. I'm prepared to trust Einstein. But we make the mistake of thinking it's proved because someone else proved it. But as Lama Yeshe said, the Four Noble Truths becomes real for you when you hear it directly from a person who's your teacher, and then you can realize it. Otherwise, it's just theory. Otherwise, it is just belief. But that's how we think of religion. It's just intellectual laziness, you know?
Yeah. And karma is coherent with the way we continue to understand the universe, because we keep discovering more and more laws that underlie, you know, all the aspects of both material and also kind of mathematical, you know, realities and even say our.
But I think karma can only make sense intellectually, theoretically, and then eventually experientially when we understand what the mind is. And that's what we have to say here. We haven't actually said the words. But for the Buddha, mind is not physical. Mind is not a function of the brain. Mind is not the product of another creator, or it's a schizophrenic idea for the Buddha that someone can give you a mind that's the most wacky idea on the planet. Mind has got more subtle levels, and mind is beginningless and endless, and mind has this potential to become a Buddha. Without positing that, karma is a load of rubbish. So the law of karma is that what the mind does programs the mind. And because of this intimate relationship between the internal and external energies, and talking about the physical energies, everything we think and do and say. I mean, Lama Zopa said in the Kala Chakra Tantra, there are these detailed descriptions of the intimate relationship between internal and external energy. The universe for this Buddhist view is that the world is made of the 4 elements. Clearly in scientific model, we don't talk the 4 elements anymore. That was back in the medieval days. But this is still the model the Buddhists use. The physical world is the 4 elements. And we've got the grosser physical energy out there, the mountains and the houses, and we have the physical energy here, and we have subtle physical energy. So the subtle physical energy is the subtle nervous system, 72,000 subtle channels coursing through our body. This is the knowledge of the Tibetan medical system. And that coursing through those channels are all these subtle wind energies, the subtle prana, the subtle winds. The Tibetan doctors study this for years, and all the winds are inextricably linked to our states of mind. So as Lama Zopa said, and this is understanding karma, everything our mind does, even when your mind is slightly angry, one, it pollutes your mind and trains your mind in more anger, but two, it immediately pollutes the wind energies that are inextricably linked to your anger. As you know, you'll go to your Tibetan doctor, she'll feel your pulses, and she'll feel the exact imbalance of those winds, and she knows it's related to your anger. That imbalance is related to your attachment. All the winds are related to our different states of mind. So everything your mind does impacts upon the mind and leaves imprints, and then your anger pollutes the winds, which in turn eventually cause you to get a sick body, which in turn creates the cause eventually of an imbalance of the external elements 1,000 lifetimes later. So that model is the only way, that hypothesis is the only way to see the karma is logical, based on the 4 elements, based on this view of the mind and the intimate, inextricable relationship between mind and the physical. Then it makes sense as a theory. We have to learn that, and that's from the Vajrayana. It's very powerful.
That's wonderful. We're going to go back to purification here. We have a question in the room from Abby. Abby, I'm going to have you ask your question about purification. We talked about it earlier, and you had a question along those lines.
Yes, Abby.
Yes, hi.
Hello, Abby.
So much, Robina. I'm so glad to see you again.
Good.
It's a kind of a two-part question. Am I still here?
You are, darling. I can see you and hear you.
I can't see you guys.
Oh, what happened?
Okay. But let me just ask the question, then I'll try to get this screen back. My question is, can conscious suffering be a form of purification? And can regret or remorse for past deeds be combined with this practice?
Just to clarify your words, sweetheart, can you just say conscious suffering? What do you mean?
I mean, when taking on the suffering of others.
Oh.
If someone does something to me, instead of going into thinking about it or whatever I do, just feeling the pain instead of, it becomes my pain, and then just
okay, that's called compassion, darling. That's called compassion. I wouldn't say that's suffering. Suffering for Buddhism, by definition, is related to misery, is related to negativity. That's called virtue. That's incredible compassion. I would not call that suffering. That is like putting atomic bombs under your suffering, under your negativity. You're purifying your karma like crazy by having empathy for someone else's suffering. That's unbelievable. But that's called compassion. That's called empathy. That's amazing. So special. That's not called suffering.
And the second part is, can regret or remorse for past deeds be combined with whatever?
Of course it is. I mean, this is one of the practices. This is the compassion wing practice, where you happily would feel that if I could, I would take upon myself that suffering of someone else rather than they have it. This is the most stupendous practice. And regretting and having remorse for anything we've done in the past, then you can even think that by having this suffering, may I purify all the things that I've done in the past. That's a marvelous practice. That's like the antidote. The first step is you regret all the rubbish of the past, and then you decide, I'd rather have that suffering than that person. That's like an atomic bomb on your suffering. It's in your past karma. It's an amazing purification, sweetheart. It's marvelous. Wow. Well done.
If I could talk about that, we have another question, but before we get to that, so much of, there's a theme that both of you have shared of reversing habits.
Yes,
a big part of this is it feels like a tremendous amount of work. And we've also accepted the fact that provisionally, we can accept karma as a theory provisionally. How do we, this is incredibly hard work. And as students who are all at various levels of engaging with this tradition and trying to implement it in our daily lives, it is of great benefit to how others are doing that. And could you both share that journey as you've implemented this? Because it feels like a tremendous amount of work. It's massive years and lifetimes of habituation that we're reversing with this. Can you give some inspiring words from your own practice?
I'm so sorry, Stephen, I missed the point a bit. Forgive me.
If you could just give some inspiring words from your own practice of implementing this in terms of accepting karma provisionally.
Accepting karma. Oh my God, yeah, I can say. Shall I say first, Scott?
Please, yeah. Please.
Okay. No, I know. I mean, when I first heard the teachings, I went through my life. I was a Catholic, totally devoted to God. Then I gave it up and became a hippie and got into sex and drugs and jazz and then politics and always looking like, mentioned before, for me, it was looking for a way to see the world. I wanted a philosophy. I wanted a way of seeing the world and why there's suffering. So when I bumped into Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, I was like 31, and 31 or something. And I mean, I didn't understand Lama Zopa. It was so complex. I knew his words, but this arcane kind of presentation was beyond me. But I knew there was something there. I knew I'd found my path. But the thing that really was powerful for me was this idea of karma. And it was massive. It was a huge shift I had to make in my mind at that time. I mean, I'd been a radical lefty and a radical feminist, and coming into this situation where the nuns sat behind the monks and the monks were the bosses and everything was he. And I mean, I was a radical feminist. So it was a huge, enormous struggle, because when I began to understand that my mind came from before and that I created the cause if any suffering I had in this life, that I created the cause, then it was sort of like I had egg on my face. And I realized, wow, this is what I've been missing in all my life. It was an explanation that I found so powerful. And I can say all my life, through my practice and being my own, my dynamic personality, being troublemaker and shouting and everything and harming people. I mean, I'm a nice person too, I suppose, but getting into trouble, I've really had to learn to really practice the whole view of karma. Otherwise, you're just pretending. Otherwise, it's just rubbish. You're just walking around wanting to feel nice. I had to really realize you got to eat the rubbish. You've got to really take it on board. You've got to really put it into practice and really know if everything is my karmic appearance. Every time something bad happened, I created it. But every time something good happens, and we forget that one, that is so powerful too. When we can own all the good stuff, we never question the good stuff. We never think, why do good things happen? Because the junkie in us only wants good things and we assume we deserve it. We're so arrogant. But when we start to own all the good things, how fortunate, why I've still got good health, people are kind to me, I get money, I'm taken care of. When you really own all this, then it becomes real for you, not just some vague theory that you just put into practice when you're feeling miserable every now and again. Then when you own the good stuff and know you created that, then you can own the bad stuff more easily. But it's been for me the most powerful one since I remember since I first heard the teachings. And it's when you really can start to practice. It's easier to practice when everyone's being nice to you. It's easier to sound like a nice Buddhist when everything's going well. But it's the work starts when the problems come, and that's when you really start to see. That's when you start to practice. It's like you go to the gym and you do your push-ups, or you do your machine, and the moment it hurts you, you stop. When you're not practicing, you're lying. It's only when it starts to hurt, that's when you put your money where your mouth is. That's when you start to practice. Otherwise, it's all just theory and boring, And
Scott,
that's it.
That's, it reminds me of something a senior student of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche called, when you put on the false smile and you're inside, you're wrestling with all the garbage, but you haven't yet kind of exhibited that, to come to terms with it. He calls it stupidity shamatha.
There you go. That's interesting, isn't it? And we have this misconception, I think, we being a nice person walking around looking all lovely. I mean, it's actually, that's why I love my friends in prison. They're eating the shit, they've got no choice but to eat this junk and turn themselves around and become happy, content human beings in these garbage dumps. It's such a powerful experience for me, such a powerful example,
Scott, same question to you. As you've implemented this, and however provisional you've accepted karma and integrating it into a life of practice, some inspiring words and encouraging words on how that's been for you.
Well, I wanted to go back to this Lama Yeshe quote, because I think it's just such a good check on whether you're actually doing Buddhist practice, which is that if your practice is effective, the relationships around you will improve, like especially with the people in your immediate vicinity. Because I think I've spent a fair amount of time on Buddhist practice and then go and have a fight with my wife or something right after doing this practice. So I think just recently, I think it just started to settle in, like that there's this yardstick, that there's an easy way to see whether your practice is effective. Just look at the people you interact with every day and see if your relationships are getting better. And then it's not very hard to figure out the actions that will improve those relationships. And it comes down to like the attachment, for me at least. And then of course there's like ignorance at the root of that. But you just thinking logically, like, how can I stop this conflict? I need to give the person what they want. oh, but that's at odds with what I want. Well, what do I really want? Do I want this external thing, or do I want to be happy? And I think finally just settling and thinking, I want happiness. I don't want this list of things that I thought I wanted, you know, from everyone around me and from my neighbor and so on. And then I think it really works a little bit, you know, like I'm actually much happier. I didn't get the things I thought I wanted, like the list of things that I thought I wanted from everyone around me, my daughter, my wife, and then the neighbor and colleagues and so on. But I'm so much happier for like giving up some things that were pretty hard to give up, actually. So I think that's.
Well, that's the compassion wing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I'm talking at the wisdom wing. I'm only at the wisdom wing. That's a compassion.
I don't know about
Wow. I tell
you know, the other thing too is like the shortcut, because there's a lot of, you know, experienced practitioners here. And something I forget a lot in my purification practice is to do it with everybody. You know, like with the Mahayana practices, when you do them and visualize everyone else in the world and even all the little creatures doing the purification at the same time, you know, they say it multiplies it just by billions and trillions. And like, I find that like experimentally, even though I may not understand like how that works, experimentally, it really works, because you can be in your own little purification, like trying to purify my acts, my problems. But like when you really think of everybody who has similar or worse problems and that we're all purifying at the same time, I find like that's just like a practical meditation tip. I think a lot of us have gotten taught, but I forget it a lot. And when I remember it, I find that helpful too. I don't know, Venerable Robina, what do you
Very
think?
nice, Scott. Lovely.
That's wonderful. Thank you both for sharing that personal reflection on this topic. We, getting back, we have one more question from our participants, and then Scott, if you'd like to ask a concluding question to Venerable Robina, I'll turn it over to you after this. So let's go back to the meaty mechanics of karma. The question reads, I would appreciate if you could talk about the linkage between the seed and the conditions allowing the seed to ripen. I used to think that they were independent, and by changing the conditions, I could prevent the seed from ripening. Now I am inclined to think that the seed would attract the conditions for its ripening. Because of our ignorance, we would still end up facilitating those conditions for its ripening. Could you talk about that?
That's interesting. Well, of course, you're absolutely right there, I think. But I think that's where we have to start at the first level. That's why they say, you know, if you're in a relationship and like say, I'm fighting all the time with my partner and I can't control my mouth yet because I'm not at the level of giving the victory, then I've got to remove myself from that condition. Otherwise, I'm causing myself a nightmare. So if I'm an alcoholic, I've got to remove myself from the alcohol so I can have the luxury to then work on my mind. So we can only start at the gross level. And at the grosser level, if you remove yourself from the condition, the karmic seed can't ripen. So equally on the other side, I remember my friends in prison, no, even myself when I was a kid, okay? I used to love going to mass. I loved God, but we had a family of 7 children. I was always very volatile. I was a bully to my sisters. I was always fighting. I was angry, yelling and shouting. And I got very naughty at some point. So my mother sent me to live at boarding school. Well, you know, I'd never thought of this, but overnight I became a saint. Nobody saw that behavior in me in my family because I was around all the other kids. I had no control over my behavior. But as soon as I went to boarding school, I became a saint because the conditions changed. And it was a miracle. I studied for the first time. I went to mass 7 mornings a week. I was completely controlled. I was behaving nicely. I passed my exams because suddenly the conditions changed and it ripened my virtue, which would not have ripened if I'd stayed in my family. So it was, and my friends in prison, my Mexican gangster friends who live in a condition in Los Angeles, never heard the word Buddha. They go to prison, sitting in their cell 23 hours a day, and they read a Buddhist book. And that is the new condition that then triggers a whole new area of that would never have happened if they had not been in prison. So conditions are huge. But I think the person's question is right. At a subtle level, it's very hard to say. I mean, at a subtle level, karma is incredibly sophisticated, you know. But at a grosser level, we can really, when we realize this is the first level of practice, when you really protect yourself and get yourself in the right conditions and remove yourself from the wrong conditions, all the other stuff, and you can flourish. The virtue can flourish. And that's so special. That's one's food for thought.
Oh, that's wonderful. You know, as we conclude, Scott, a last question, last topic, exchange for Venerable Robina and yourself.
Hmm. Well, I have lots of questions. I could ask one more. One other option, though, is we could do like a very short purification practice if you wanted to lead a Venerable Robina. There's
We
some,
could do it 4 minutes. We could do 6 minutes. We could
Yeah.
do that easily.
maybe
Do
that's
four
because,
opponent powers. Very nice idea. Let's do the four opponent powers really quickly and like really naturally. Don't think it's religion. So
yeah,
just close your eyes and just think first think, regret, the 4 R's. So just think of the dumb things you've done today, the dumb things you've said today, maybe badmouth Mr. Trump or whoever you don't like, badmouth your next door neighbor, badmouth somebody, kick the dog, kill the ant by accident, who knows, just something. Think quickly of stuff you've done today with your body and speech that you want to regret because you don't want the suffering results. Don't think of compassion yet, just as for yourself. And in this life, like I had an abortion when I was 23. I always use that example. It's very painful for many women. I decided I'd kill this fetus in my womb. The conditions ripened, which included that that baby came to my womb like a magnet. They must have created the cause to die by their coming to my womb because I thought immediately I was pregnant, I was going to have an abortion. So I regret that action. Why? Because I didn't know at that time I was causing myself suffering. So anything we've done like that, we've killed the fish, we've killed the ants in our life, things we've done, that, especially if we carry as a burden, we feel bad about. Regret from the depths of my heart because I didn't know what I was doing then, and I don't want these seeds to ripen in the future as my suffering. I regret from the depths of my heart, for my sake. Think like that. And all the things you don't remember doing that have left seeds in our mind. I regret from the depths of my heart because I don't want these seeds to ripen as my suffering in the future. It's compassion for yourself. And then anything you think, if you have past lives, anything I've ever done in past lives to harm any sentient being with my body and speech, since beginning this time, I regret from the depths of my heart because I don't want these seeds to ripen. I'm sick of suffering. And now your mind, the delusions, the ego grasping, the attachment, the aversion, which are the root of this. I regret these from the depths of my heart, the depression, the anxiety, the worries, the fear, the jealousy. I'm sick of this rubbish. I'm sick of this suffering. I regret all this from the depths of my heart, these ancient habits, because I don't want the future suffering. So whom can I turn to? Next step, reliance. So we think of the Buddha. Just imagine Buddha above our head. If we know Vajrasattva, fine, put him there above our head. And if we don't, just think of the Buddha, this enlightened energy, a person who's accomplished this path, just a light body sitting above our head. And we think, oh, here's a doctor who's got methods that I can use to purify myself. You know, this has got nothing to do with being forgiven. Nothing to do with that. Buddha would forgive us, but it's not his job. He's not a creator. He gives us the methods that we can use. We rely upon him for his methods. How amazing to have a doctor whose methods we can use to purify ourselves completely. And the second part, we now think of those we have harmed. We have compassion for them, the ants, the baby, the fetuses, the people we've harmed, past lives and present, the bad boyfriends we've badmouthed, the ants we've killed, whatever. All these suffering sentient beings who don't want suffering just like us. I regret for their sake. I must purify for their sake. Compassion for them. And now if we're brave enough, we can have compassion for those who've harmed us. If you can. If you can't, that's okay. Because why would we have compassion for people who've harmed us in our life? Because they will suffer in the future for what they have done. Because everybody experiences the consequences of their own actions unless they change. So for this reason, we have such compassion for those who've harmed us, if we can. So the third step, the remedy. We just imagine from the Buddha pouring light into us. Just imagine coming into us, just very briefly, filling us with this light, purifying every imprint of all the actions we've ever done since beginning this time with our body and speech and our mind. Totally purifying, filling us with this radiant light. As we just say the mantra 3 times of Vajrasattva, if you know it. But visualize the light filling you and eradicating all these negative imprints, because they have no inherent nature. They're completely impermanent. Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Diro Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Subashayo Mebawa Nurakta Mebawa Sarvasiti Memprayatsa Sawakama Sutsame Sidam Shriyam Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tacha Gata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasamaya Sattva Ha Hong Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Diro Mebawa Sutoshayo Mebawa Suboshayo Mebawa Nurakta Mebawa Sarvasiti Memprayatsa Sawakama Sutsame Sidam Shriyam Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tacha Gata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasamaya Sattva Ha Hong Pe Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manupalaya Vajrasattva Tenopatita Diro Mebawa Sudoshayo Mebawa Suboshayo Mebawa Anurakta Mebawa Sarvasiti Memprayatsa Sawakama Sutsame Sidam Shriyam Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tacha Gata Vajramami Mutsa Vajraba Mahasamaya Sattva Ha Hong Pe. Completely purified. Imagine how amazing. None of this is set in stone. There's no karma that can't be disappeared. Full of this radiant light purifying us. How incredible. Another 4th step, resolve, the determination to change. So we've taken vows, if we have, and we can reiterate those vows. This is powerful. It's like digging a groove deeper in your mind. I will never kill. I will never lie. I will never steal. I will never create sexual misconduct. I will never this, and I will never that. It's powerfully, it's like reiterating that it's like practicing the piano. You keep getting better at it. It's not wishful thinking. So powerful. I will not. Resolve to change. And then just for a minute though, as Lama Zopa says, don't lie to yourself. Your old rubbish habits like bad mouthing your boyfriend and shooting your mouth off about Mr. Trump. Then your old habits, just for a second for yourself, you think of some of your old ridiculous habits and give yourself a timeline. Maybe for 24 hours, I will not say bad words about politicians with a negative motivation. Maybe for 5 minutes, I won't badmouth my boyfriend. Just make some decisions to yourself about your old ridiculous habits. You know, I won't be so lazy. I won't do this. I won't do that. Just things you feel you can accomplish for a few minutes, for 10 minutes, for one day. Talk to yourself. Make a decision. Be confident. And then we just imagine Buddha dissolves into light, this enlightened energy, so radiant, so blissful. Our own potential dissolves into us, and we imagine we become completely oneness with the energy of the Buddha, enlightened beings, our own potential manifesting. And for like about 30 seconds, just bliss out. Imagine you expand to fill the universe, completely radiant, completely clear. And then just finish with thinking, you know, our body and speech, think like the bodhisattvas, that our body and speech is what others see and hear. So think that my body and my speech is for their benefit. Try to think that way. And then think my mind, that's my business. So watch our minds like a hawk. And in this way, we make every minute of the day practice for both the sake of others and for our own sake. And that's it, we're done. Thank you. Okay.
Venerable Robina, Scott, thank you both so much. You know, you may not have noticed, but we called this in conversation, which we feel is a very, very genteel step towards what His Holiness always tells us to do, which is debate, to explore, to be curious, endlessly curious. And certainly, Robina, you've shared with us that this is something that's you're deeply emblematic of for all of us. I mean, this is something you have brought, reminded us again and again. Scott, through your work on the podcast, critical analysis and analytical meditation is one of the driving things that you're bringing forward. So we're so glad at Tse Chen Ling, a place that's devoted to furthering these advices and doing our part to kind of create a forum for people to come together, debate, discuss, and not just accept wholeheartedly or half-heartedly, but to go for it again and again and again and again. So we're just so glad that this could all come together. Thank you both for your time. I know it's late for some of you. We had a lot of people watching on Facebook, and they were all very gracious. So just so you, thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank you, everybody. So nice. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you so much, Venerable, everybody, Venerable Carol, everybody. Thank you, darlings. Much love.
Thank
you.
Robina. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you.
One little technical note, I put links to Venerable Robina's activities in the comments section. I put links to Scott's podcast, A Skeptic's Path to Enlightenment. And I did want to just say this was brought to you by Tse Chen Ling for free. If you have the ability, please consider making a donation to help support programs like this. I put that link in there as well.
Wonderful.
So thank you very much. And if you can't offer, just visualize Miles Davis's In a Silent Way. I think that would please Venerable Robina greatly.
Wonderful. Thank you, darling.
That's great.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks a lot.